Okay, today, thanks for joining me online for our nutrition lecture. Most of this should be a review. I know several of you have had me for sports nutrition, and so you're familiar with the macronutrients, their functions, how to prescribe them. We're going to review what the macronutrients are. We're going to talk about calculating energy needs based on a client's goals, as well as developing a nutrition program. So in terms of importance of macronutrients, protein is probably the most important. As you may remember, proteins provide structure to muscles and all our tissues. So your hair is made up of proteins. Your nails are made up of proteins. Your skin is made up of proteins. Obviously, your muscles, like you see Lady Gaga wearing, are made up of proteins. They assist in regulating cellular function. Your hormones, your enzymes are proteins. They play a role in transporting substances around the body, and though they don't account for a very large portion of the energy that we use during exercise, they do provide some energy. And the more you are in a caloric deficit, so if you are semi-starving yourself as a result of trying to lose weight or some sort of situation you may find yourself in, like on Naked and Afraid, then proteins coming from your body tissues will serve as a more important source of energy the further into that period of starvation or semi-starvation that you go. Now, when we calculate protein needs, we want to calculate them based off of an individual's body weight, not off of a percentage of their total energy intake. And on the next slide, we'll look at why. Now, if you look to the right, you'll see the daily, right, the mouse isn't working, there it is, right here. You'll see the daily protein requirements based off of an individual's goals, their type of activity, and this is based on their body mass. Now, this is, for most accounts and purposes, based off of people of a normal body composition. So all of you guys in my class, all of you ladies in my class as well, I use guys to describe everyone, you all watching this, this would describe you. If you are working with a client who is very, very lean, then they may need a little more protein per kilogram of body mass. And if you are working with a client who is overweight or obese, then you should base these numbers on their ideal body weight. So if you're working with a client who weighs 300 pounds and they want to decrease their body mass to 200 pounds, then base their protein requirements on a body mass of 200 pounds, their ideal body mass. Even in sedentary individuals, higher protein intakes result in greater reductions in body fat and greater lean mass retention. And active individuals engaged in weight loss, and we're talking about people who are really, really lean, so maybe physique competitors, may need even higher protein intakes of 2.6 grams per kilogram. On this next slide, we can see why we don't want to base our protein intakes as a percentage of our total daily calorie intake. So let's look at an individual. They're 75 kilograms. They resistance train 3 to 4 days a week. Maybe they do some cardio as well. We can look back and see that they need probably about 1.6 to 2.0 grams per kilogram of body mass of protein per day. So let's go with the middle, 1.8 grams per kilogram. This means this individual needs to consume about 135 grams of protein per day to account for all the protein turnover, so all the breakdown and rebuilding of lean tissues that's happening in their body each day. If we look at the chart below, we'll assume this person burns about 2,500 calories. This is their maintenance caloric intake. So if they're consuming 2,500 calories, and we're using that higher number suggested in that chart, 20%, then 2,500 calories, 20% of that is 500. There's 4 calories per gram of protein, so 500 divided by 4 gives us about 125 grams of protein. So we're close. We're close to our intake needs. This is fine. Imagine they're trying to gain weight. They're trying to gain muscle, so they need to intake more energy than they're expending. So they're consuming 2,900 calories per day. Here you can see that accounts for 580 calories if we're basing it off 20%, and that means they're consuming 145 grams of protein per day. So they're eating a little more protein than they might actually need. Not a big deal. It's not going to harm them. It may become expensive. Sources of protein are much more expensive than sources of carbohydrate or fat. But let's look here. The individual is trying to lose weight. So they've reduced their caloric intake below what they're burning by 500 calories. 20% of 2,000 is 400. 4 calories per gram gives us only 100 grams of protein per day. So in this instance, where they are on a caloric deficit, where protein becomes even more important to maintain lean mass, they are under-consuming protein. And if we are basing it off a percentage rather than basing it off body mass, then this individual may actually lose some lean mass during their diet period. This is not a good thing. This will reduce their resting metabolic rate. It will reduce their performance. It will make it more difficult for them to maintain this new body weight and body composition that they have achieved. Perhaps you've heard the body can only absorb a certain amount of protein at once. The rest is wasted. Maybe you've heard that. I've heard that. Maybe you've been to Rio's. If you haven't been to Rio's, you should go. Rio's is an amazing place where these men in funky boots and sweet pants walk around with skewers of roasted meat. And they come to your table and they slice it off, and you just eat that meat all night long until you can't eat anymore, until you essentially need to be rolled out of the restaurant. And if you're driving home and pulled over, it's going to be a very interesting story to try to explain to the officer that you are not intoxicated, but rather have a stomach full of meat. Well, all that meat that you've consumed, all that protein you've consumed, I estimate my greatest accomplishment at Rio's was consuming about 3.5 pounds of meat in that single sitting. That protein is not wasted. You digest it. You probably get the meat sweats that night digesting it. If you've never had the meat sweats and you've been to Rio's, then you didn't do Rio's correctly. The meat sweats is when you get home and you lay on top of your blankets and you turn the AC on and you turn the fan on and you take your clothes off and you are still sweating. Well, the reason why you're sweating, and that was a power line that just fell behind me. The reason why you're sweating is because your body is digesting all that protein and it is absorbing all of that protein. Now, just because you absorb it doesn't mean that you're going to assimilate it into body tissue. Assimilation is where we actually use those amino acids to either build new lean tissue or to repair lean tissue that has been damaged or is turning over. So that extra protein is going to be converted to either glucose or fats and then used for fuel or stored. So the supplement industry may want you to believe that you can only consume and absorb 25 grams of protein at once, and so you should consume protein shakes throughout the day, but this is not the case. Now, the optimal frequency is probably about 3 to 5 protein feedings per day. And to maximize protein synthesis, we need to consume about 0.25 grams per kilogram per feeding. For most people, that's about 15 to 25 grams per feeding at the very minimum. Now, your total protein requirement should dictate how much you eat per meal. But if we look at the typical protein distribution of Americans here on the left, we can see a very little bit at breakfast, maybe a bagel with some cream cheese or a bowl of cereal. A little more at lunch, maybe a sandwich, maybe some pasta, and then a very protein-heavy dinner, maybe a piece of meat or chicken, etc. What's happening is we are only maximizing protein synthesis. If you look at that pink or purple line across the screen, we're only maximizing protein synthesis at one meal. Those other 2 meals, that protein's not being wasted, but we could take the same amount of protein and better distribute it, as you see on the chart on the right, so that we maximize protein synthesis 3 times a day. And so if your clients are used to eating breakfast, lunch, and dinner, and you don't see a reason for them to snack, this is perfectly acceptable. But by taking some of that protein at dinner and distributing it to breakfast and lunch, like we have on the right, we can improve protein synthesis, minimize protein breakdown, and probably see some greater improvements in regards to body composition. And you don't have to spread it out perfectly. You can still see that they are eating a larger dinner, which most people like to do. The next macronutrient to talk about is carbohydrates. Probably the most tasty macronutrient, especially when you add some fat and some salt on top of it. As you likely know, carbohydrates are the preferred source of energy for high-intensity exercise. Carbohydrates are also protein sparing. So in individuals who are eating higher carbohydrate diets, they don't need to eat quite as much protein as individuals who are eating lower carbohydrate diets or are in a period of cutting or dieting. How much carbohydrate you need really depends upon how much exercise you are doing. So sedentary individuals may only need about 3 to 5 grams of carbohydrate per kilogram of body weight per day. And then it goes up based upon your level of activity and your volume of activity. The glycemic index gives us a measure of how quickly blood glucose levels are elevated following the consumption of a particular food. Now, it was once thought that high glycemic foods, so sugary foods, fruits, refined grains, white rice, that kind of thing, make it more difficult to lose weight or increase fat storage compared to low glycemic foods. And while there is a very small difference in the amount of energy expenditure required to digest processed foods versus non-processed foods, it's probably not enough to make a difference in regards to the results we see in terms of body composition. But we've looked at studies that have compared eating a high glycemic diet to a low glycemic diet. In these studies that were conducted in a metabolic ward, where basically people are in a hospital and everything is controlled. What they eat, what they get to eat, the amounts are all controlled. We don't see a difference in weight loss. When we look at free-living individuals, though, high glycemic foods are usually more calorie dense. In other words, if you eat a bowl of, Fruit Loops, you're going to eat a lot more calories in that bowl than if you eat a bowl of, let's say, wheat bran. So they're more calorie dense. They're also a lot more palatable. It's a lot easier to overeat Fruit Loops than it is to overeat wheat bran. And so trying to consume more moderate or low glycemic foods and mixing them with proteins is probably going to result in lower overall daily calorie intake and greater results when it comes to weight loss. It's not the fact those foods elevate blood glucose really quickly that's causing any changes, but rather what happens after we eat them. We don't feel as full. We may eat more without realizing it. Finally, fats. And fats provide fuel, but they also provide some function. So about 20 to 35% of your daily caloric intake should come from fats, with about 10% of that or less coming from saturated fats. And it is essential to consume at least a minimal amount of fat. If we don't, we can impact and cause some fat-soluble vitamin insufficiencies or deficiencies. We can negatively affect hormone production, specifically sterols, so less testosterone, less estrogen. And there's really no relationship between total fat intake and most metrics of health. Most of that is associated with eating too much calories in general. So what is the minimal amount? Well, for most people, for a prolonged period of time, it's about 40 to 50 grams per day as a minimum. And I encourage you if you don't believe me, to try to eat less than 30 grams of fat or 40 grams of fat per day for a prolonged period of time. And what you're going to find is your diet, the foods that you're eating, are incredibly boring. You're eating plain chicken breast. You're eating white rice and brown rice and vegetables with no oils, no butters, no red meat, no fatty fish, nothing that makes foods delicious. It's going to become a very boring diet very quick. And you probably won't be able to stick to it for a prolonged period of time. At least most people won't. So when we set up a diet, the first thing we want to do is make sure that we are providing balanced meals. The meal on the left is balanced. There's a source of protein, starch, and some fruit and vegetables. The one on the right, the one we got from Olive Garden, is not balanced. It's all starch with a little tablespoon of tomato paste. The meal on the left is going to digest slower. It's going to create greater feelings of fullness. We're not going to eat as much throughout the day. We're getting all of our major macro and micronutrients. The meal on the right, you're going to be hungry again in an hour. So this part of the lecture is going to be focused on improving or changing body composition. We're not really going to talk about improving performance as much, but more so, how do we change body composition? Because most of the clients you get in this class are going to want to reduce their fat mass and hopefully want to increase their muscle mass. So to lose fat or to lose weight in general, we need to think of Newton's laws of thermodynamics. Energy can neither be created nor can it be destroyed. So if you eat more energy than you expend, that additional energy is stored as body tissue. And if you eat less energy than you expend, then that difference is made up by breaking down body tissue. Hopefully, if you're eating more than you expend, you're increasing body tissue by increasing lean mass. And if you're eating less than you expend, you're decreasing body tissue by breaking down adipose, body fat. So step one, if you want to lose fat, eat less than you expend. If 1 pound of fat provides about 3,500 calories a day, then reducing calories by 500 per day will provide for about 1 pound of fat loss per week. For most individuals, we don't want to lose more than 1% body weight per week. When we start getting above that rate of weight loss, in fact, the leaner you are, the less you want to lose per week. And when we start getting up to higher rates of weight loss, what we see is a after effect, where people lose the weight and then they gain it back, and they gain it back plus some. See, we don't really have a weight loss problem in the United States of America. People go on diets all the time and they lose weight all the time. And you probably see it on your social media all the time, the before and after pictures. Well, what you don't see are the after pictures, because what we do have is a weight maintenance problem. Those people that lose the weight are rarely ever successful at keeping it off, especially if it's not combined with exercise, and especially if it's some sort of fad diet program. And rapid weight loss depresses the metabolism. It creates behavior changes that make people seek food and increases their level of hunger, and ultimately it results in them gaining weight back plus some. And every time they gain weight back plus some, it becomes more difficult to lose it, and it becomes a lot easier to gain it back plus some more the next time they lose it. So slower weight loss results in greater sustainability. In fact, it takes about 1 to 2 years after you've lost that weight where your body is essentially fighting to get back to the body weight that you were at before. So it takes about 1 to 2 years to establish that as your new set point. So if we want to improve body composition, the first thing we need to know is, what does somebody burn per day? What are their total daily energy expenditures? And total daily energy expenditures will be comprised of their resting metabolic rate, how much energy is required to fuel their essential organs, their non-exercise activity thermogenesis, so how much energy are they burning, fidgeting, moving around, doing chores, things like that, their exercise thermogenesis, and then the thermogenic effect of food. So when you talk to your clients, what you want to find out is what is their lifestyle like and what is their exercise like, or what is the exercise program you are going to put them through going to be like. And once you can document that activity, then you can calculate their total daily energy needs. What I want you to do right now is calculate your basal metabolic rate. And you can use this formula, or you can follow that link and enter your information there. And this will give you your basal metabolic rate, which is pretty similar to your resting metabolic rate. So pause this recording and go calculate this, because we are going to use this. You should probably come up with a number between about 1,000 if you are a very small human being to 2,000 if you are a rather large human being. Go do this, record the number. Welcome back. Now that you know your basal metabolic rate, or an estimation thereof, we need to add and apply an activity multiplier. And so based upon the type of exercise you do and the frequency, you're going to multiply that number from anywhere from 1.2 to 1.9. If you're thinking, oh, well, I'm not sure if I'm lightly active or moderately active, I'm probably in between, then multiply it by a number in between, like 1.45. Pause the video, multiply your basal metabolic rate by whatever number you think is appropriate, and write down your total daily energy expenditure. Now that you have this, we know that not all weight gain is muscle gain. We know that not all weight loss is fat loss. So how do we ensure that fat is being lost or muscle is being gained? So we want to avoid going from the guy on the right to the guy on the left. We want to avoid becoming, it's called skinny fat. In other words, we want to make sure that if we're losing weight, we're losing adipose tissue and not lean mass, because there are all sorts of negative effects associated with losing lean mass, as you well know. Decreases in bone strength, decreases in metabolic rate, decreases in abilities to carry out tasks of daily activity, increased risk of injury, lower lifespan, the list goes on and on. So how do we ensure that's happening? Number one, slow rate of weight loss. Number two, adequate protein to maintain lean muscle mass or lean mass in general. And number three, resistance training. If you want to gain muscle, then you need to consume more energy than you expend, because a pound of muscle only contains about 135 grams of protein. Most of the rest of that is water, with a little bit being made up of glycogen, lipids, minerals, etc. But to actually power the machinery that synthesizes muscle tissue is incredibly energy expensive. We're not sure just how energy expensive it is, but it's been estimated to be about 2,000 to 3,000 calories to synthesize 1 pound of muscle tissue. So if the goal is to gain muscle, then eat a little bit more protein, but more so, you need to eat a good amount more calories, maybe 100 extra calories per day. And a good rate of gain is probably about 1 to 2 pounds per month. Now we should mention here that it's important to track progress. To do this, you can use tests of body composition. You can measure body composition with skin folds, with bod pod, with a DEXA, with a bioelectrical impedance, or you can measure body weight. If you're going to measure body weight, then you should do it every day under the same conditions. As you know, your body weight is going to fluctuate from day to day. So wake up first thing in the morning, go to the bathroom, take your body weight, record it, forget about it. After 2 weeks, you can analyze the trend and see what's occurring. And if your goal is to lose weight and you see that your body weight is trending either in a straight line or is trending up, then you're clearly eating too many calories. You should reduce calories very slightly until you start to see that body weight trending down, and vice versa for gaining weight. When we set up a diet, when we look at talking about nutrition in the general public, walk down the magazine aisle at Kroger or CVS, or scroll through Instagram with some sort of hashtag of nutrition, and you'll see that popular fitness approaches this pyramid from the top down. They talk about supplements. Consume this supplement and you'll lose weight without having to change your diet. Or they talk about nutrient timing. You should do intermittent fasting. Don't eat breakfast, don't eat lunch, eat all your calories at dinner. Or they tell you the exact opposite, how important it is to eat breakfast and that you should not eat any of your calories after some arbitrary time in the evening that the sun goes down, 6 or 8 p.m. or whatever. Or they talk about types of food quality. Become a vegan, go paleo, go keto. There's a thing called a snake diet where you essentially eat at Rio's once every 4 days and don't eat anything outside of that. Well, if you want to improve body composition, if you want to improve someone's health and their performance, you really need to work from the bottom up. So what is the appropriate energy intake for that individual? You calculated your total daily energy expenditure. And if your goal is to maintain body weight, then you know your energy intake. Next, what is the appropriate macronutrient distribution? Most importantly, are you getting enough protein? And then, is your ratio of carbohydrate to fat intake within reason? And then we can worry about the types of foods that you eat and when you eat them. So if you're going to construct a diet, then work from the left to the right. Appropriate calories, appropriate macronutrient distribution. Then we talk about foods, high quality protein sources, about 3 to 5 times per day, maybe 4 to 6 if you are working with someone who has really high protein requirements. What are high quality sources of protein? Generally, they come from animals: meat, fish, dairy, eggs, etc. For carbohydrates, we want to make sure that we're consuming carbohydrates that provide us with a high amount of nutrients. So these would be things like fruits, vegetables, certain tubers, maybe whole grains for most meals. And then carbohydrates that are more fuels. So these would be more refined carbohydrate sources: white rice, white bread, etc. Those should be consumed mostly pre and post workout. For fats, want to make sure we're getting some fats, some high quality fats that are providing us with essential fatty acids. So fatty fish, olive oil, nuts, things like that. And then also enough fats to provide fuel, and we should be consuming those in the non-workout window ideally. But really, if you can cover the left two aspects of this in most of the clients you're going to have in this class, you'll see some significant improvements in their body composition. And the other two you can work on, and sometimes they'll just fall into place. So how do we calculate macronutrient requirements? Well, I've put together this cool little calculator right here that's found on Moodle. And so, if the goal is to increase lean mass, then you need to add 300 to 400 calories. I want you to do this for yourself right now. So put in your suggested caloric intake. If your goal is to maintain, then don't change that total daily energy expenditure. Put in whatever you calculated as total daily energy expenditure. And if your goal is to lose some weight, then subtract about 500 calories from that. I'll do myself. So I want to gain weight. Next, enter the protein requirements in grams. So this is going to be somewhere between 1.2 to 2.2 grams per kilogram of body mass. Again, if they're overweight, then it should be their ideal body weight. I weigh about 90 kilograms, about 90 kilograms, a little more, 95 kilograms. So we'll go with 2.2. 95 times 2.2, about 200. Finally, add in the fat percentage. This should be somewhere between about 20 to 35%. If your client likes to eat more starchy foods, then use that lower value. Use about 20 to 25%. Starchy foods being like pastas and breads and things like that. If, on the other hand, they have more of a taste for fattier meats and fattier foods, then use a higher number, 30 to 35%. And if they don't really care, just use something in the middle, 25 to 30%. When you put this number in, double check here that your fats, that the grams are not less than about 40 to 50 grams. If it is less than 40 to 50 grams, then increase the percentage until that number reaches about 40 to 50 grams. And so here we have our calorie needs and our macronutrient needs in grams that would meet that person's goals. Now, once you've done this, then you can start applying some foods and some sample eating plans for your client.